Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today, I am so excited to be chatting with Whitney Van Voorhis. She is the Senior Packaging Production Designer at Tarte Cosmetics. Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. Whitney has a very interesting journey. She went and started in graphic design and is now doing packaging production design, which is a very interesting shift. So we're going to dive into all what her career journey looks like, what she currently does. But before we jump into all of that, Whitney, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Of course. So my name is Whitney Van Voorhis. I am a creative professional with a background in graphic design. Currently, I am the senior packaging production designer at Tarte Cosmetics. I've been there for about 5 years, and I started my career with a BFA in graphic design. And I did a bunch of different things, but I guess most of my experience was in kind of fashion and beauty. And that was always sort of the path that I wanted to go down. And then always kind of had a thing for packaging, especially when I was in school. So I kind of was able to merge those two things together, the beauty fashion side of it, and then the packaging and design side of it. And that's sort of how I ended up where I am now.
I love that, especially being able to figure out what your different passions are and combine them all into one job, I think is a really special thing. And yeah, Whitney has worked at L Brands, which is the brand that oversees like Bath and Body Works, Victoria's Secret. She's also worked at Elf, then Estee Lauder, and then now at Tarte. So you definitely have this
Yes.
fashion beauty history, which is really cool.
Yeah, I did a lot of like freelance contract type jobs. So that's why if you like look at my resume or my background, there's like a lot of like short-term jobs. So I guess if you're a designer, I think you can take those type of freelance short-term jobs as well. And I kind of saw that as well, it became an advantage for me, I think, because I was able to work with a bunch of different companies, learn from different people within those companies, and kind of go from place to place and just get that experience before I really landed on something more permanent.
I'm excited to dive into your freelance experience because I think what you said there is so important and such a great way to get experience. It's also hard to get into that, I think, at the beginning if you don't know what you're doing. So I'm excited to jump in and like also see what you did there, because I know a lot of girls that are also interested in that freelance space. And typically the hardest part there is just getting started. But then, like you said, you were able to build up a ton of experience with these big brands that ended up then landing your now role at Tarte.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so we're gonna rewind the clock way back.
Okay.
Way back to your bachelor's, which you got in graphic design.
Yes.
So if you could just maybe tell me a little bit about this kind of early stage in your career of starting in graphic design before you kind of started to switch into where you are now.
Sure. Before I even, got into, college and, graphic design, I was very unsure about what I wanted to do just coming out of high school. The funny thing is that when I first started college, I was a psychology major. That only lasted for one semester. I still really do love psychology and I find it very interesting. But I didn't feel that that was the right career path for me. I always, loved being creative. And when I was a senior in high school, I took a graphic design, kind of like an intro to graphic design type of course. I mean, back then it was just super basic, like really basic Photoshop and Illustrator skills. I remember like making some type of like collage or like designing like a label for a soup can, right? Like really basic things, but I really enjoyed that. And I remember having the thought like, oh, could this actually be a career path for me? Like, is this actually a thing that I could do? So that's sort of where the idea came from. And then once I was already in school, and I, like I said, I was a psychology major, and I was like, this really isn't for me. I decided to switch my major. So I originally went to like more of just a general like liberal arts school. So I went to Monmouth University, which is in New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey. And so it was a good experience for me. Just getting into that program, got to be, really creative, learn a lot about myself and what kind of things I was interested in. The downside, I think, though, was that I felt that like a lot of like schools that are more kind of tailored to design programs have stronger like industry connections, especially for internships, which I think is really important if you're, trying to get into the field and maybe work in more of like a corporate setting. So I feel like because of that, I don't want to, well, I suffered a little bit because of that, I think.
Just
I mean,
getting your first like foot in the door, your first job after getting that degree.
yeah, so, at the time when I graduated, it was 2009. And that was during the like a recession. So it
Yeah.
wasn't the best time to graduate. And I was also living in central New Jersey, which I mean, there are some design opportunities that you could find, but it wasn't the best place for someone in a creative field to be. Luckily, I wasn't too far from New York City, so I decided to, move further north. And I moved to Jersey City, which is where I still live now. I've been here for 12 years, which is crazy. But I decided to go back to school at FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology in the city. At the time, I was sort of thinking about maybe changing careers. I still wanted to stay in a design career, but I was thinking about maybe doing something more large scale, like exhibitions for museums, more like 3D type stuff. So I had found this master's program at FIT that I was thinking, oh, like this could be really like a good step for me to like kind of, maybe do this master's program and then see where I can go from there. Um, Things kind of went in a different direction because that master's program was super small. They only accepted maybe like 25 people a year. A lot of the people that were in the program were older, like had been established in their careers, or they were from outside of the US, right? So I felt like I had a very slim chance of getting in. I was like 23 years old at the time. I had maybe a year or two of experience working. And yeah, but I just decided like I'm going to go for it. So I took these classes at FIT, which were in their continuing ed program, which, they were kind of just some supplemental classes so I could beef up my portfolio because most of my portfolio was, graphic design, 2D type of stuff. So I did that for, I think it was 2 years. I applied to the master's program and I didn't end up getting in, which, after a couple years of like working towards that, it is definitely a disappointment, right? It's a letdown
Yeah.
to have all that build up to something and then it doesn't happen. But, I let myself be sad about it for a day or two, little time just to get over it, kind of mourn the loss of that idea. And I thought, like, do I want to do this again, or should I just kind of go in a different direction now? So after doing all that, I didn't really want to do it again, like reapply. So I decided to move on from there. But the good thing was that while I was at FIT, I met people, and I was able to connect with, people in the industry where I could kind of, get some better jobs. So one of my professors at FIT worked for this, well, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was a store called Daffy's. And if you're from, New York or like northern New Jersey, you maybe remember it. It was like kind of like maybe like a TJ Maxx kind of situation where, they would sell like higher end stuff, but for less. So one of my professors was the creative director for Daffy's at the time. She had worked there for a long time, and we were doing a project in one of the classes I was in with her where we had to use Photoshop, and she saw that, I knew how to use it really well. And I was actually like helping other people in the class, like with this specific thing for the project. Cause I remember we had to like make some kind of thing, like logo or something to print out for this like display. I don't exactly remember all the details, but she asked me, do you know how to, use Photoshop? Like, and I said, yeah, I went to school already for graphic design. I have a degree in it. And she said, oh, that's great. Would you be able to freelance for us, for the holidays, because we need some extra help? And so that's kind of how I made my way in to doing that.
That's incredible. I
Yeah.
have so many little questions I need to ask you now on everything that you just went through.
Yeah, that was like a whole long story, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious because you mentioned how, you got this degree in graphic design, your school wasn't
Mhm.
really known for it, and then when it became
Yeah,
time for you to find a job, you were just really struggling. How was it like choosing a degree like graphic design? Because I know sometimes it's kind of like psychology, and it's like the stereotypical, like, oh, you're going to choose a degree in psychology or graphic design. Like, is there even a career you can get out of that? And obviously, as
yeah.
marketers, there is huge opportunity for a graphic designer, but did you have to go against any of that, perception, outwardly perception to, pursue this passion that you had for design?
Oh yeah, well, totally. I mean, most people around me at the time, people that, if they weren't in the field especially, were like, well, what are you going to do with that? Like, oh, if once you graduate, but what's your job going to be when you graduate? Like, so what's your plan after you graduate? Like, not even considering that, oh, this is my plan, you know? Um, so I did have a lot of pushback, from some people in my life, which, when you're young and you're trying to, figure out what you want to do, and get into something that maybe isn't as a traditional path as, another career would be. It's hard to have that pushback. You really have to, be like an advocate for yourself, and tell yourself, I know it sounds kind of silly, but tell yourself, like, I can do this. This is what I'm going to do. Like, just keep it in your mind that this is what, I'm meant to do, and I will find a way to do it.
Yeah, it is, I think, something that a lot of young people struggle with, of being like, I
Mhm.
love this and I want to do this, but then everyone else kind of questioning you. And when you're young, you don't really have that, you trust the people around you the most to tell you. And so
Yes.
it can be very, very difficult when you are having the closest people to you tell you, making you second guess what you are truly passionate about. And then
Yes.
for you to also then graduate and then have difficulty then starting to get your foot in the door, you ended up making the decision to go back and get some extra schooling. And I know there's some people that are also interested in that, right? Maybe they just graduated,
Mhm.
they're having a tough time in the job market. Can you maybe speak to a little bit about that decision to go back and consider getting, I know you didn't get into that master's program, but going back into school, and like what your thoughts are on doing that when you are feeling stuck in your job search?
Sure. So I think for me, I did feel kind of stuck. I think I felt limited by where I was, physically located at the time, and also felt like, maybe there was more out there for me in terms of, design related education that I could get. And I know, like, school isn't always everything. Like, you can get experience in other ways as well. Um, but I felt that, at the time, I sort of wanted to, like I said, still stay in a design field, but maybe try something that's a little bit different. And I also knew I need to get out of here, So I think, I mean, I know now there's a lot more like remote opportunities, but at the time that really wasn't even a thing, right?
Yeah, so you're
So
limited by where you live.
yes.
Yeah.
So I felt that, me going to New York, that I had to do it. Like I was very scared. I, grew up in a small town. I wasn't, I didn't have a ton of experience being in a city at the time. And now looking back, it's like so funny to me because, everyone's like, oh, you're such a city person. But it's I felt that that was what I had to do. Sometimes you have to do something that's a little bit scary to make that change in order to get closer to that goal.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
obviously we can see now that it worked out for you, but when you're in those
yeah.
moments, it's definitely very, very scary, especially moving to a new place too.
Mhm.
I've interviewed a lot of women on the podcast that have had to make similar choices or moving somewhere completely new. And I
Yeah.
think it definitely has changed since the pandemic because there's more remote opportunities, a lot, it's more normalized to just like pick up and move somewhere new. I live in Austin now without
Yeah.
ever having, I visited Austin, I moved during the pandemic. So I think it's cool to see that being a little bit more normalized and opening up opportunities for people. And I want to also now, so this is kind of beginning your transition into going a little bit into package design, which I'm
Mhm.
really excited to talk about. So
Yeah.
if you want maybe to tell me a little bit, is your kind of your first role doing this packaging design, your freelance role at TriStar Products, or where did this kind of begin for you?
Okay, so my first experience with doing packaging design was in school when, I was getting my bachelor's degree. I did a project for a class I was in, and I was like, wow, I really love this. And I actually, like my senior year, I did an independent study in packaging design. Because I just wanted to go further into it, learn more about it. And then yeah, so I think the first role where I actually kind of was able to use that was when I worked for TriStar, which was this as seen on TV brand. And so when I don't know if they still have these like infomercials now, right? But back you probably
I
remember
remember
like, you
them.
were, watching TV like when you were a kid or whatever, these infomercials that would come on TV about like juicers or these like various like products you could buy. I don't the juicer really stands out to me, but that was one of their major products was this juicer. But yeah, so when I went to work there, they had me work on some, various like packaging products. So our projects, some were like kitchen related. So like you had the juicer, there was some kind of like cookware set, pots and pans. This isn't anything too fancy, but it was good experience. And then I
Yeah.
think so one couple things that I worked on there were like hair care tools. So like curling iron type situation. So with that, I was really able to go more into that beauty type of realm. And it was cool because I got to do, I mean, I really did everything with it. They kind of gave the project to me and we're like, okay, like, you know, just do it from start to finish. So all the concepting, the design, you know, obviously there was an art director that I worked with and he kind of like at the time oversaw me and, you know, I would run things by him. But um that was sort of my first project to that I used in my portfolio to then go into this more of like the beauty industry.
And that
So
role then led you over to L Brands, which you then worked on Bath and Body Works and Victoria's Secret, and then very
yes.
much leveled up in the package design that you were doing there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, so while I was doing that work, the As Seen on TV company, that's when I was kind of finishing up that time at FIT. So I was still going to school. And then, you know, once I didn't get into that master's program, I was like, okay, this is my time to really decide what I'm going to do from here. Like I need to really level up my career if this, you know, if I'm not going to do this like school situation, like the master's thing. So I went on a lot of interviews. I think probably in the course of 3 to 4 months, I went on 15 job interviews, like in
Oh my
person.
gosh.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, now it's great with like Zoom and everything, but like during that time, there was no Zoom, there was no, you know, virtual interviewing. It was all you go there, you meet them type of thing. So, um, you know, I was working, I would go, and then it's the time I was working in New Jersey still. So I would go from New Jersey into the city, like on all these interviews. Some were obviously better than others, but that was definitely an experience. And I, you know, had moments where I was like, is this gonna work out? But I kept pushing, I kept going, and I finally got the interview with L Brands, which I think now they're not called that anymore. They split into Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works as their own entities. But at the time, L Brands was like the overarching umbrella for them and a couple of other companies. I got the interview there. It was started as a temporary job, like a, you know, couple months like position. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take it and we'll see what happens. So I got that job. I went there. I started as, you know, a temporary employee. And then eventually, I think maybe after about a year or so, they converted me to a full-time employee, which was great. And I stayed there for, I think it was maybe like 3.5 years. So,
What was some of the things like switching from a freelance doing like, you know,
mhm,
designing stuff for as seen on TV to then going to, you know, I'm sure back this time Victoria's Secret was probably huge and the same with
yeah.
Bath and Body Work. So did the stakes feel higher? Did you feel more pressure or kind of what was this transition like for you?
I mean, it was definitely a change because that was my first job working, you know, in New York City. So, you know, just the whole working in New York, that was definitely a change. You know, I guess the role itself, because I went from before just doing more straight up like the design part of it, like the concepting, the actual, you know, development design part of the job, to then moving into more of a production based role, which at the time, like I didn't really know what that meant because they didn't really, you know, when you're in school, they don't, at least when I was in school, they didn't say like, oh, there's this other aspect of, you know, of graphic design called production. Like, what is that? You know, you may like some people, you know, if you're in the industry or you're kind of familiar with it, they may hear the term like production artist. I personally like to call myself a production designer because I still consider myself a designer. And I think the word artist like is kind of strange, but that's what a lot of times what they call the role. So when I went into this job, they told me, okay, you know, this is going to be more like 60% production and like maybe like 30-40% design. I'm like, how do I get to 100 there?
Can you
But
explain that
yeah,
difference
so it
between?
was like more so production and then, a little bit of design. So I was like, okay, sure, I guess. Like I get like sign me up. And it was doing design artwork for all their international products. So basically taking most of the stuff that you see here in the US, like, so think Bath and Body Works, like soap, candles, their fragrances, lotion, all that stuff, and then converting the artwork that they use on those products into being, an international design. So that would be like adding translations to the artwork. We did a lot of work also with the Middle East. So in the Middle East, you can't use like certain imagery, certain terminology in those markets. So we would kind of have to like redesign some of that. Um, but I guess maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I definitely, going in, I really didn't, I kind of didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew I had, a design background. I knew, I could do the job, but I didn't really know everything that I felt like I needed to know. Um, and I think that's also a thing, like, sometimes when we're looking at jobs, we see they have all these things listed out, like we should be able to do A, B, C, and D. And maybe we only know how to do A and B, but you could learn C and D on the job. So I think it's still important to be like, oh, okay, maybe this doesn't 100% meet what I've done in the past, but I can learn how to do this. Um, and I learned a lot on the job and from people like my coworkers, people that were more senior level than me at the time that had been doing this type of work for years. I learned a lot from them.
That's really interesting to see that shift in,
Mhm.
or I didn't even know that was a nuance in
Yeah.
design at all. So it's interesting to hear that. Did you enjoy this production piece versus the graphic design? Was that, or is that something that, or kind of what did you learn, I guess, about yourself in that role, or yeah, of what you liked?
So I did like the job. I liked the things that I was working on. I think when I first started, I was mainly just doing, their home fragrance products, which was like the candles and those little like plugins and things that you see, room sprays. And then as I got further, into it, I started kind of working on everything. I was a little unsure at first because, I still enjoy being creative and doing, concepting and, coming up with ideas and doing the research beforehand that goes into, the initial designing process. And the production aspect is more technical. It's funny because before, we had this, we were going to be recording, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to explain what production is. And because a lot of people, they're like, production, what is that? It could be so many different things, like, and there could be production in like film, there can be production in design, like it could really mean so many different things. Um, so I was like, okay, let's do a quick Google search and see like what Google says when you look up like production designer. And I thought it was really interesting, like a couple things that I found that were like, oh, production designers are the unsung heroes, in the design world. And I was like, you know what, that is kind of true because um, basically, like just thinking of the timeline of a project. So you have like your initial design process where you go through like the concepting, coming up with the idea, research, like, doing the actual design, coming up with different options, and then finally landing on your final design. So, the designer will do that. In some companies, the designer might do the design and the production piece. In a lot of them, they're separate. So let's say they're separate. The designer does everything up until the final design is, it's complete. And then it goes over to go into production, which is basically like what I tell people is making everything perfect. So it's very technical. If you're a perfectionist, it's a great job for you. Which I am. So it kind of played into that aspect of my personality. So it's, setting up the file for production, for print, to make sure that it's everything, it looks good, that all the images are correct, that all the type looks good, it's set up in a specific way for the printer, and then creating a final file that then gets sent out to the vendor so that they can print it and put it into production on their end.
Yeah, I've never even knew that would be a specific role. So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
There are definitely a lot of perfectionists out there that would enjoy that type of technical and attention to detail.
Yes.
So interesting saying that if you are someone that likes things very detailed and enjoys attention to detail, then that is probably a good area for you to work in.
It is very detail oriented, and I think it depends on the brand and the company too. Like some companies are more specific than others on depending on like what type of printers they're working with and how they like to do things. Like I know so for example, like when I worked for Estee Lauder, which was another more of like a freelance role for me, I they were very, very specific on how they wanted their files. Like if something was like 0.5 millimeters off, they would send it back.
Wow.
So very, very specific, like especially from, what I had come from, to then go into that and be like, whoa, okay, I need to I thought I was like really, fine tuning things here, but they want it to be extremely accurate, which was at the time a little, discouraging for me at times because things would get sent back, but it made me better at my job because I had that experience where I had to be on point, right? So then when I went off until, I went to Tarte after that, I was able to harness kind of all these things from these different roles that I had had before, and then bring that with me into my, next role.
So now that you mentioned this Estee
Mhm.
Lauder one, so after your time at Alberns for about a year, 2 years, you went and did freelance for
Mhm.
Elf, and you also did freelance for Estee Lauder before then
Yes.
going to where you are now. So can you talk about leaving from from a full-time role to then doing freelance for a while and why you chose to go that route?
Sure. So the backstory behind that is I actually left L Brands for another full-time job, which I won't really get into all the details of, but it didn't work out for me. It was not the right fit. I thought it was going to be great. It was for another beauty company, so I thought it was really going to be a big step up for me. But I had worked with a recruiter to get this position, and I think some things maybe got lost in the process. Because when I got to this job, it was not a creative job at all. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. They handed me an IBM laptop, and I was like, I don't know how to use this. So it was a little bit of a scary time. I left after a month, which is something that I'd never done before. I always made sure I had something lined up if I was going to leave. but I left because I felt like it was the best thing for me and I needed to do that, even though I didn't really have a safety net there. So that's kind of how I got back into doing like freelance stuff. I had some connections from, my previous jobs that got me the freelance work at Elf. So I went there for a couple months, which was good. Another experience at the time, they were kind of functioning more of like kind of like a startup mentality there. So I kind of went from, these like a more corporate atmosphere to then this, more kind of casual startup type of atmosphere. And then going back into doing that like beauty packaging, which I liked. But yeah, that was my plan, was let me just freelance for a little while, figure out what I want to do from here, at least, have something where I'm bringing in money until I can figure out the next step.
Yeah,
Which
I was gonna say I have a friend that something similar had happened where
uh-huh,
she got a job, or actually just, and she's a graphic designer as well, and it didn't end up like didn't end up being, or just didn't like, it did not follow through, I guess, in this sense.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
sometimes it's like you said, it's really scary when you've always had a job lined up. You go to start at a new place and it either the job falls through, or for your case, it's not what you expected. And
right.
you're just like, well, I just left something that was really safe to go somewhere,
Mhm.
and now I'm completely on my own again. And so I really admire your ability then to go and like be able to go back on those past connections and then transition into freelance. I think that's a really great option for those of you who may find yourself in a similar situation in any field where, like, okay, this did not like work out the way I wanted, and obviously you need income coming in. And so the freelance route is a very, very smart one that you can do when you're in this like marketing or creative field.
Definitely. I think once you kind of have been in the industry for a little while, you meet people, um, those people know people, you keep kind of those connections open. Um, and those people are, they're willing to help you out, because it doesn't, when you're in that situation, you think like, oh my God, the world is ending. How did this happen to me? I've been so like, I've worked so hard. I've, been so methodical with like how I've like, picked these jobs and like made sure they were the right thing for me. But sometimes, things, they just don't go according to plan. And it's good to have, those connections, those people to, be there to be like, oh, I think I know someone that's looking for someone, or, like, or just asking like, if you hear anything, like just let me, keep an eye out. Like they're willing to, you know to be those, connections for you, which I think is really great. And this thing happens, like you said, it happened to a friend of yours, it happened to me, it happened to another friend of mine, like within this past year, like a similar situation. And it sucks like it sucks when it happens, but you know you gotta you have to just be able to push through and use those connections, and then know that you will land back on your feet at some point.
One thing I'm curious, Whitney, is I'm assuming you have a portfolio of all your design work. So one thing I love talking about is portfolios,
Mhm.
and I'm imagining yours is amazing if it has also been able to get you these freelance roles. So can we take a little tangent, and can you tell me
Sure.
maybe just a little bit about your portfolio or advice you have when it comes to like building your portfolio and maintaining your portfolio? I feel like it's more common in the graphic design world to have portfolios, but I feel
Mhm.
like it's less common in just like general marketing, but I think it's equally as important. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. So your portfolio, obviously you want to showcase your best work, right? When you first get out of school, that's probably going to be school projects, things you did while you were in school, or maybe if you picked up some little like freelance side gigs on the side, include that. And then as you kind of move through your career, you always want to be editing it down, right? Always be showcasing the best work. So, if I'm maybe 5, 6, 7 years into my career, I'm probably not going to be showing my, school projects anymore, right? So,
I love your thing editing down. Oh,
yeah,
I always share with the students in my accelerator. I was like, I've seen portfolios that are 100 pages long for no good reason at
it's
all.
too much. Yeah.
And it should be I always like the analogy, it's the average of the work on there, not the sum. And so like, yeah, you're right. Take out all that old stuff.
Absolutely. Let's say you have like 50 pieces, right? Like I could have 50 pieces from the past, even like 5 years or something like that, and even less time, but you don't need to show all of that. It's really like, how can I present my best self? Like, what were the best, things that I worked on that I was really proud of, or I got really good feedback on? um and you can always show it to other people, like, hey, can you take a look at this and let me know what you think? Or if you have like a mentor or somebody else in the industry like that can kind of look at your work and say, okay, keep this but maybe take this out, if you're really unsure of what you want to keep and let go of. But I think it is important to really, as you're, going through your career and applying for jobs, to really keep in mind like what am I showing and what's showcasing me in the best light.
Yeah, I love that advice of keeping
Mhm.
it as simplified as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming this had paid off for you because after this little stint of doing freelance with Elf and Estee Lauder, you ended up your current role now at Tarte. So I'd love to talk about that transition and a little more about what you do at Tarte.
Sure. So when I was working at Estee Lauder, a coworker of mine had gotten, I think it was like a LinkedIn message from someone at Tarte, like an HR person. They had an open job, and he told me, he was like, "Oh, I'm not really interested in this because it's packaging, but would you be interested?" And at the time, I wanted to get back into more of a full-time, something that was more stable. Because with the freelance thing, it can be great, but especially with these, if you're doing like an extended period like of time for a company, let's say, 3, 6 months, whatever, sometimes they can just say, hey, we don't need you anymore. And you got a couple days notice, and so you're out of a job. But so I wanted to get back to something that was a little more stable. Luckily, this coworker of mine, had gotten this message and he thought of me. So that's, like I said in the, before, like, make connections with people that you work with, like, so that when these things come up, like, they'll think of you. So he sent this to me, and that's how I got in touch with HR at Tarte. I think at the time, the job was more of like a visual merchandising position. It was production, but for visual merchandising. And so when I went in for the interview, I was like, I don't really think this is the right fit for me. And of course, coming off of that previous experience a couple years prior, it was like 2 years or something ago, where that bad situation happened to me, I was kind of extra like, my ears were like really like, oh, is like hearing various things. Is this right? Should I really be, I need to kind of listen to my gut, whether or not this role is right for me or not. And I think that's important to do, as you're applying for jobs, not just taking something because it's available. So I, told them I didn't really want to take that position because it wasn't right for me. But if something else comes up, keep me in mind. So, which is exactly what happened. I think it was in that, not much time went by, and they reached out to me again and said, we have this packaging position that just opened. Would you be interested in coming, back in and interviewing with our packaging team? Which is, what I did. It went really well. And that's how I ended up there. And like I said, I've been there for a little over 5 years, so obviously I like it. But yeah, so at Tarte, I do all of the packaging production work. I'm the only production person on the team. Um, and the good thing about when I went into that role is that I could kind of make it my own, which I really loved, right? I could use all of this experience that I had had from these previous positions to then mold this role into what I wanted it to be. And, like I had those experiences and the knowledge from, like I was talking about, like those really like doing all those really specific little things um from my time at Estee Lauder. And so I could bring all of that with me and be like, okay, this is how I'm gonna approach this position. Which it was great to have that opportunity to do that. And so like I said, I do all the packaging production work there, setting up all of the production files. So basically what we do is once the file is ready or the artwork is ready, it gets sent out to other teams in the company to review it, comes back. And then once it's approved, we release it to our vendors who print and put everything into production. So I handle all of that. So working very closely with the packaging designers and my boss, who's the VP of design. And then another part of my job, which I picked up while I was there, I think after the first year or so, is I also work very closely with our photography content team. So I work with them on all the photos that we use for packaging. So basically, just think about when you are in a Sephora or Ulta and you're looking at the box that has an image of like blush or bronzer or lipstick or whatever it is. We shoot all of that in-house, and then I review those images before we finalize them for the physical, packaging. Work really closely with the photo retouchers to review and give direction to them on how, we want the imagery to look. Because it's, especially after the pandemic, having photo or image, on the packaging became a very important thing. Because before that, you could go into store, open it up, like look at it, swatch things, like see what it looks like. But then during COVID, they weren't doing that. There was no sampling. You wanted to be able to see when you picked up the box, okay, this is what I'm getting, right? So that became a very important component of that process.
So you are involved in many different aspects, I can see.
Yes.
When it comes to this, I would love to hear, is there a packaging that you are most proud of here at Tarte, or is there a product that you worked on that is your favorite?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I really love the Maracuja Juicy Lip Plump. That's probably one of my favorite products. I'm wearing it right now. So I mean, we've done so many colors, and then that kind of became its own. It started as just like a lip balm, and then it sort of became like it offshooted into like all these different variations of that. So we've done so many different colors, and like from plump to like more of a gloss to a lip liner. Like there's just so many different, it became its own little like mini like brand within a brand.
Yeah.
And then I guess the like eyeshadow palettes are probably one of the things that are the most involved to work on. especially if it's like like a larger palette. So when we do like stuff for the holiday season, we're gonna, there's more palettes, they're larger, there's gonna be more color variation. So just, working on that, just to see the final product when it, the physical packaging when it comes out. Um, as a production sample or even in stores, it's just so cool to see, because you think about like all the hard work that you put into that.
Yeah.
And just to be like, physically see something that you worked on like out in the world, it's just very rewarding. And it's kind of like a little pat on the back, like, hey, I did that.
That must be really, really cool. Especially, yeah, I can imagine like going into the stores and being like, I designed this, I designed that, I designed that.
Yeah.
That's
It's
gotta
it's
be,
definitely it's cool to see, your work come to life.
yeah. Can you walk me through what the process is like? I'm curious on more so like the ideation, even like before it comes to actually like making the design itself of like,
Mhm.
let's say Tarte launches a new product and you guys have to go and design, the packaging for that. And I know earlier you mentioned that some like research goes into that, but I would love to hear kind of what your kind of how you approach that process.
So I don't necessarily work on that aspect of the process so much there. I mean, so our team is called Creative Packaging. There's two other designers on the team that do most of the like concepting and design work, and then it comes to me for like the production aspect of it. So I mean,
Got
I
it.
can speak a little bit to it from like what I know and see and experience, but it's not, I'm not like totally involved with all of that. So they'll do like mood boards, like concepting for that, to kind of show like, okay, like these are different like ideas that we might want to go with. There's obviously a lot of the CEO is still very involved with the creative process, so like most of these things get run by her. Or if she has, any ideas that she wants to incorporate into the design, she's overseeing, a lot of the packaging. So very involved with that. And then they might narrow it down to like a couple different ideas. They'll do sampling, getting in physical samples from like the vendor that they may go with, to see what it looks like in person. um and then, there might be some back and forth there, like, oh, we want, like, say it's like a lip gloss or a, lipstick, like a tube, like, oh, we want this to look more blue, or we want it to be more yellow, or it needs to, be more iridescent or something like that. But then again, like, I'm kind of on the outside of this, right? So I sort of like watch all of this happen. And I then, once it's kind of all finalized, they have landed on their final design. The CEO is, she approves the design that she likes. It then comes to me, and then I do the final like production work on that. And then still kind of, even before that, involved with like the photos, but that also takes place like after, everything's finalized, right? So there is a lot that goes into it, like, when we see this like a physical, like, just makeup itself, or any product, we just see like the physical product, but there's like all these, things that go into it, different teams working together to make sure that, it gets to that final stage.
Super interesting. I have loved you talking about this. Like we could talk forever about just how this process is, but I think it's really cool because if you are listening and you are someone interested in creative work or design, and just knowing that there are so many ways for you to get involved, and especially even just in this packaging. So if you do find this interesting, I encourage you all to explore more on like what these different roles look like and how it breaks down. I am curious, Whitney. We've gone through so much about your career journey. Now you ended up here, but I know outside of your job, you are also a yoga teacher and you also have a very full
Yes.
outside of work. So I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. I realized I didn't even get into that at all, but yes, I am a yoga instructor. I've been teaching for 6 years now. So I went through training, obviously, to become certified. I did a 200-hour training, which is like
Wow.
kind of this, yeah, which is the standard training to become a yoga instructor. So 200-hour training, and then after that, I did kind of a more like specialized training. Um, so I mainly teach power yoga. So I kind of did a more like specialized training in power yoga. Um, and then that's, kind of where I'm at now. I just teach 2 classes a week because I do work full time. So it's just my side thing that I enjoy doing. And yeah, I mean, it's been great to have that outside of my design career, because it does still have creativity involved in it. I have to come up with my classes, I create all the sequences, I create my playlists for my classes. And it's also, I see it as a way for me to give back to people. I think yoga has done so much for me personally. And I love being able to bring it to others and have it make a positive impact in their lives as well.
That's beautiful. I love
Yeah,
hearing about it. It's also, I love hearing about, how important it is for you to have something outside of your 9 to 5. And yeah, I think becoming a yoga instructor is a great alternative. It's funny
mhm.
how this is not like all of my podcasts. I definitely had a handful of girls in marketing that also are yoga teachers on the side. I never
Oh,
knew
that's
this was like a
great.
thing. So I love hearing about it, and I can tell it's something you're passionate about, and I can assume it's something you get a lot of fulfillment out of too, which is absolutely amazing.
Definitely.
And again, we just talked about so much. This has been so fun, Whitney. My last question for you here is, if you just have
Mhm.
any advice for someone who wants to have a career similar to yours, what would you share with them?
Um, well, I think the important thing is to find what you're passionate about, and really, stick to that. Like, it's okay if other people aren't doing the same thing that you're doing. Um, you know, you it's okay to, mess up along the way too, right? But even if other people aren't going the same route as you, it's okay to, continue on your path and do what's important to you. And I think that is how you will find the most like fulfilling career for you, is by following, your gut and your instinct and doing what feels best for you. Um, and then, there's going to be obviously I personally faced a lot of rejection along the way. Try not to let those things get you down. I mean, it's okay to like feel your feelings at the time and like go through that. That's totally fine. But try to keep going. Like, I've had people come to me that are early on in their careers and say, I've applied for all these jobs, like I'm not getting any responses, or I'm interviewing and I'm not getting these jobs. And it's gonna happen, especially now. I feel like it's so challenging to find the right job and to like even get interviews, but you have to just keep going. Keep applying, keep your resume updated, keep your portfolio updated, make those connections, utilize them. And when you're in a job, learn, like, utilize those people that are in similar roles, or maybe higher up like the ladder than you, who can really teach you about the industry, or show you, even just little like tips here and there on like how to do certain things when you're on the job, because I felt like that really made a huge difference for me, was, you know, utilizing those senior people and learning from them. And eventually, you know, I think putting in the work, it does make the difference. Like, you know, hard work does pay off. It did for me, at least. Like, I felt like I really, I mean, I don't know if I can say this, but I really busted my ass, you know, to get somewhere from nowhere with not a lot of connections. So if I can do it, you can too.
Oh, perfect way to end this episode. I'm all pumped up. I love that. Thank you so much, Whitney, for sharing
Course.
your wisdom and your journey. I absolutely appreciate it. It has been so much fun talking to you. So thank you again for coming on the Sky Society podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been an honor to be here and to talk to you today.